Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 9, the origin and history of the Knights Templars and the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, from Ancient Mysteries and Modern Masonry by Charles H. Vail. Lecture 9, the origin and history of the Knights Templars and the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. We will first consider the military order of the Knights Templars of the Crusades. This organization was originally called the Order of the Temple and was founded in 1118 to 1119 AD by 9 Benedictine monks who resided in monasteries at Jerusalem. The object of the order was the defense of the Holy Sepulchre and the protection of the Christian pilgrims who visited the sacred shrine. The holy place had been desecrated and the Christians persecuted by both Saracen and Turk. The Christian monks joined the Patriarch of Jerusalem in guarding the approach to the city and lived under the Benedictine rule, fighting for the cause of the Church. The Patriarch assigned them quarters in the palace of the Latin kings of Jerusalem, sometimes called Solomon's Temple, and it was this that gave the Templar name to the order. The new order rendered valiant service to the pilgrims and others in need. Their fame spread rapidly and their ranks as rapidly increased by recruits from the religious fraternities in Europe, members of the French nobility, and then from all classes of society. These recruits were organized by skillful military leaders and before long became renowned in the art of war. The order was strictly a religious body and was composed of 3 classes: knights, chaplains, and serving brothers. A council was held in 1128 to determine the statutes of the order. Rules of discipline and obligations numbering 72 were adopted. At a later date, they were elaborated into a more complete ritual. In our last lecture, we mentioned that the early Templars possessed a secret doctrine. The early Freemasons also taught in secret, making it difficult to trace one without mentioning the other. I need here only to recall that the secret science had passed along from age to age until received by the Knights Templars. According to the record of the German lodges, the Templars received their mystic teaching from certain Syriac Christians. But of what particular doctrine, cult, or order they do not state. Perhaps they were members of the Brotherhood of St. John, which, according to the Cologne record, possessed a mystic teaching, or perhaps they were members of the Johannian Christians. Again, perhaps these 2 societies may have been of the same or a very similar order. The Johannites were also called Christians of the East. There is a tradition that traces the secret teaching of the Templars to the Johannites, so it is more than probable that the Syriac Christians were members of this brotherhood. This tradition, as given by General Pike, states that there existed at that period in the East a sect of Johannite Christians who claimed to be the only true initiates into the real mysteries of the religion of the Saviour. They pretended to know the real history of Jesus the Anointed, and adopting in part the Jewish traditions and the tales of the Talmud, they held that the facts recounted in the Evangels are but allegories. The Johannites ascribed to St. John the foundation of their secret church, and the grand pontiffs of the sect assumed the title of Christos, anointed or consecrated, and claimed to have succeeded one another from St. John by an uninterrupted succession of pontifical powers. He who, at the period of the foundation of the Order of the Temple, claimed these imaginary prerogatives was named Theoclit, Morals and Dogma. Pike, page 816. Theoclit was acquainted with Hugh de Payens, the founder of the Order of the Temple, and initiated him into the Johannian mysteries, and appointed him his successor. Now, if the Brotherhood of St. John and the Johannian Christians are the same, then both the Templars and the Freemasons received their secret doctrine from the same order. It is claimed by some, however, that the mystic teaching passed to the Masons from the Templars. This may or may not have been the case, but that they were closely allied is evident from the fact that upon the destruction of the old Templar order, many of its members took refuge with the Freemasons. The secret statutes of the Templars were preserved, not only by oral tradition, but were also written in part at least. Dr. Prutz says, Gervais de Beauvier saw at one of the heads of the orders a little book with the statutes of the order of 1128, which was shown without thinking, and he knew that the same man had also possessed another book, about which he was very mysterious, and which he would not show anyone for all the world. Geheime Lehre des Tempelherren Orden, p. 45. W.J. MacLeod Moore, 33rd degree, in speaking of the Temple Order, says, "Their rulers arrogated to themselves a higher degree of knowledge in all things and taught in their secret conclaves, where none but the most trusted members were admitted, that the papal power was a false and dangerous assumption of authority over the minds and consciences of men, and that very many of the dogmas of Rome were gross and childish superstitions. They also cultivated and asserted more liberal views of faith and religion than were current at the time, being well versed in the mysteries, legends, learning and traditions of the peoples they had come in contact with in the East." History of Freemasonry and Concordant Orders, page 765. The evidence that the early Templar order possessed a secret doctrine being conclusive, we will now return to the historical development. The order spread rapidly and was soon established in every kingdom of Latin Christendom. The part which the Templars took in the Crusades is too well known to need reiteration, for from that time on the history of the Templars was the history of the Crusades. When the Crusades terminated, the Templars returned to their numerous preceptories in Europe, as the order was of no further use as a military body. Their great wealth and power aroused the jealousy of Philip IV of France, who coveted the possessions of the order, and the Pope distrusted its fidelity to the papacy. A bitter hatred was engendered by many acts of insubordination against the king's arbitrary authority, and he set about to work their destruction. To this end, calumnies of every description were circulated. They were charged with heresy and all manner of crimes. Philip enlisted the support of Pope Clement V, who owed his papal tiara to the king's gold or influence, and the overthrow was brought about. The work of suppression was too heartless to recite. Many were cast into prison and tortured to confess crimes of which they were ignorant, and finally were burned to death upon faggots. The Grand Master de Molay was seized while in Paris by special invitation of Pope Clement, cast into prison, where he was kept 7 years, and at last taken out and burned at the stake. On May 2nd, 1312, Clement issued his famous bull transferring the estates of the Templars, except those in Spain and Portugal, to the Knights of St. John. Thus perished the Order of the Temple. What became of the thousands of Templars upon the suppression of the order is not definitely known. Some may have joined the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, upon which the confiscated lands of the Templars had been conferred, and some, as already intimated, may have taken refuge in the guilds of stonemasons. Many reject this latter theory as being without historic foundation. But W.S. Perry, 32nd degree, says regarding this, "We do not question this statement as it stands. History fails to record much that actually occurs, much that subsequent ages would gladly know. We see no reason, however, for the assertion, so often made of late years, that any connection between a chivalric order, such as the Knights Templars, and a fraternity of operative Masons, such as certainly existed in medieval times, is out of the range of possibility." Page 140. Mr. Perry then goes on to argue that the guilds were known and even employed by the Knights Templars in the construction of their churches, preceptories, and strongholds all over Europe and the Holy Land. And when they were despoiled, they would naturally seek protection among the body with which they had already a certain connection. Henry E. Manning, Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster, says, "As far back as the 12th century, the lodges of the Guild enjoyed the special protection of the Knights Templars. It is easy in this way to understand how the symbolical allusion to Solomon and his temple might have passed from the Knights into the Masonic formulary. In this way, too, might be explained how, after the suppression of the Order of the Temple, some of the recalcitrant Knights, maintaining their influence over the Freemasons, would be able to pervert what hitherto had been a harmless ceremony into an elaborate ritual that should impart some of the errors of the Templars to the initiated." Page 144. This Catholic writer may know whereof he speaks, as it is generally supposed that Catholic scholars have access to certain records not accessible to others. Therefore, it is not improbable that the old order continued to exist within the guilds of stonemasons. It is also said that when the time came that they could safely proclaim the continuance of their order, They instituted the rite of strict observance and proved their gratitude for the protection afforded by receiving members only from the ranks of Freemasonry. But it is also not unlikely, as pointed out by Mr. Moore, that small organizations were kept up in many places and the hope cherished that it would be possible to revive the order. A great and extensive organization could not wholly have lost its vitality and died out without a struggle. Page 768. It is related of the chief of the doomed order that before his execution he instituted what afterward came to be called occult, hermetic, or Scottish Masonry, that the order, while seeming to die, nevertheless lived under other names and was revealed to those who proved themselves worthy to be trusted. According to these traditions, the real lineal descendants of the old chivalric orders are the Scottish Rite and the strict observance. Let us consider for a moment this rite of the strict observance. It is common with a certain class of Masonic writers to pronounce the leading spirits of the strict observance dupes and charlatans. But the long list of scholars, nobles, and officers of high standing who have belonged to this order must preclude any such classification. The reason for such stigmatization is that the members were students of mysticism and believe that there is hidden in Masonry an occult and mystic tradition which is the true history of spiritual evolution. Many of these members of the strict observance also belong to the Rosicrucians and other allied bodies, and all were seeking the old straight gate and narrow path that leads to wisdom. One of the most striking personages of this period is Charles Gotthelf, a nobleman born in 1722. He entered the Masonic order in 1742, when at Frankfurt on Main. In the next year, he is said to have established a lodge at Paris, and while staying with the French army, he became acquainted with the heads of a rite, which pretended to be, in its higher degrees, the continuation of the famous Order of Knights Templars. According to his repeated declarations, maintained even on his deathbed, he was received into this order in Paris by Lord Kilmarnock, Grand Master of Scotland, a Jacobite nobleman, on which occasion Lord Clifford acted as prior. He was presented to a very high member of the order, a mysterious personage called only the Knight of the Red Feather. Perhaps this was Prince Charles Edward himself. Von Hund supposed him to be the supreme Grand Master of the order and was appointed by him coadjutor of the 7th province of the order, Germania Inferior. Hund visited Scotland also, where he was bidden to raise the order in Germany, together with the then master of the 7th province, de Marshall, whom he always considered his predecessor. Marshall had founded lodges at Altenburg and Naumburg, but found only in the latter men worthy of being led further, viz. To be received into the Templar degrees. This is a summary by Cooper Oakley and traces of a hidden tradition of an article in the Transitions of Log Quater Coronati, number 2076. Regalini says of von Hund, in 1756 the wars had caused the Prussian Masonic lodges to be abandoned. Baron de Hund, who had received the High Templars degree in the chapter of Clermont at Paris, on returning to Berlin declared that he had been raised to the dignity of Grand Master of the Templars by Monsieur Marshall, who called himself the successor of the G.G. Master Templars by uninterrupted transmission from the time of Jacques de Molay, that Marshall on his deathbed had delegated this high dignity to him and had declared him his successor, transmitting to him all his powers and dignities. He did not omit to give Hund a list of all the names of the Templar Grand Masters, which must therefore have been a curious contrast to the list of the Order of the Temple of Paris. Hund placed himself at the head of the German reformers. He persuaded them that his rite would restore Freemasonry to its ancient brilliancy and its former splendor. His principles were altogether philosophical. He maintains that these pontiffs are the only priests of the true light, the worshippers of God, and the disciples of the pure doctrines of Jesus and of John. Traces of a hidden tradition, 82. In this connection, we need to note one Johann Augustus Stark, a teacher of Oriental languages and a student of theology and philosophy. He had held many public positions, among others that of interpreter of Oriental manuscript at the Royal Library in Paris. Mrs. Cooper Oakley says, Stark held that the mystic traditions of the Knights Templars, derived by them from those still older fraternities with whom they had come in contact in the East, were preserved among the clericals of that order who had cherished their unbroken continuity until his days. And he announced that he was in communication with certain superiors or chiefs of the order, page 84. R.F. Gould, a well-known English authority writing on the strict observance, says, "On February 17, 1767, some Masons, chief amongst whom may be mentioned von Vegesack, von Bohnen and Stark, founded at Wismar the Lodge of the Three Lions and attached thereto a Scots lodge, Gustavus of the Golden Hammer. Shortly afterward, they added a hitherto unknown body, a clerical chapter. To these brethren we are indebted for the historical fiction that the Knights Templars were divided into military and sacerdotal members, that the latter possessed all the secrets and mystic learning of the order, and that they had preserved a continuous existence down to the 18th century. Stark claimed to be the emissary of these clerical Templars, asserted their and his own superiority over the secular knights, and offered, on his claims being acknowledged, to impart their valuable secrets to von Hund and his disciples. Stark, 1741 to 1816, was a student of Göttingen and a very learned man, an Oriental linguist of great attainments, and had held scientific appointments in St. Petersburg, Paris, Wismar, and elsewhere. History of Freemasonry, Gould 5, page 104. Gould regards Stark as an impostor, but like many other materialistic critics who reject the tradition, he offers no proof of its falsity. In reply to the criticism that the Knights Templars could not have continued to exist for 438 years, unknown to the outside world, Stark says, "If he, Dr. Beester, had been somewhat better acquainted with ecclesiastical history, he would have found not only one but several religious bodies, which under far more violent opposition and persecution than those endured by the Knights Templars, have secretly continued to exist for a longer period than 450 years. Traces of a hidden tradition in Masonry, page 86. This view is upheld by C.W. King, a modern writer of note, who, speaking of the Templars, says, "Considering how widely the order has spread, it would be a mere absurdity to believe that all its traditions were swept away at one stroke by the suppression of the Templars in the year 1307. The Gnostics and Their Remains, King, page 399. Stark shows the large number of scholars in his day who accepted the tradition. Can it be that all these were dupes and charlatans? We must now pass to a brief consideration of the order itself. Regan, a noted Masonic writer, in speaking of the strict observance, says that in Germany a body was formed, approaching more nearly to the true institution than the ordinary Freemasons. The study of the Kabbalah, of the Philosopher's Stone, and of necromancy, or the invocation of spirits, occupied them chiefly because, according to them, all these sciences formed the system and the object and end of the ancient mysteries, of which Freemasonry is the sequel." Quoted from Orthodoxy Maconique, Regan, page 210, by Mr. Cooper Oakley in Hidden Tradition, page 88. It was the higher grades of the strict observance that took up the study of alchemy, etc., there being, according to our author just quoted, 7 grades into which the system was divided. Much more might be said, but this is sufficient to show that in the early days of the modern Knights Templars, there were many who recognized the existence of the secret doctrine. As to the origin of the Knights Templars of today and their connection with Freemasonry, various theories have been proposed. Some contend that the movement was the result of the numerous works of the 17th and 18th centuries on occult philosophy, and that upon the dispersion of the Order of St. John and the Templars of Scotland, the secret ceremonies and principles were obtained and promulgated, which directly led to the revival of the chivalric orders under the impression that they were of Masonic origin. Others hold that the present order originated from the high grades of Freemasonry, the Hermetic or Scottish system, and was grafted onto Freemasonry by Baron Hund in 1754. Few, if any, would maintain today that the present organization of Knights Templars is a lineal descendant of the old chivalric order. The Knights Templars of the present, in common with Masons in general, make no claim to mystic knowledge, and but few in the order even know that such a wisdom science ever existed. The degrees of the American system of the Knights Templars are the Knight of the Red Cross, Knight Templar, and Knight of Malta. The Red Cross is not embraced in the English, continental, or Canadian systems. The Templar degrees have been used in connection with Freemasonry for about a century, says W.J.E.B. MacLeod Moore. Although the Templar degrees have been in connection with Freemasonry for about a century past, it does not follow that they previously had any such connection. It was only about that time, or a few years earlier, that the error was made in Great Britain and Ireland of adding the chivalric Templar order to the Masonic systems. History of Freemasonry and Concordant Orders, page 744. The Templar degrees, like the other side degrees, were first conferred under Blue Lodge warrants, which simply means that Masons possessing those degrees came together in their lodges and worked them. In the course of time, chapters and encampments were organized, and Templarism took on a more independent and permanent form. We believe with Mr. Moore that it was an error to merge the Templar degrees into the Masonic system. In England, the Templar system has always been kept separate from the craft degrees. The Royal Arch is there considered the climax of Freemasonry. There is also a difference due to the fact that the English degrees are based upon the old Templar ceremonies, while the American system is based upon the craft degrees. This makes the American system broader and more in harmony with the spirit of Freemasonry, although it is still partly sectarian. This sectarianism is not in accord with the ancient landmarks and genius of Masonry. If we have the right to Christianize Masonry, so have Muslims, Buddhists, and all other religious sects a right to transform it to fit their creeds. Such transformations and limitations deprive Masonry of its true spirit and universal character, and should such a process become general Masonry itself would soon be destroyed. The Templar system should have stood alone on its own merits and principles. It should have been left as a series of side degrees for Masons professing Christian principles. The very name Masonic Templarism is a misnomer. The sectarian character of the one is not in accord with the universal character of the other. This declaration does not cast any reflection upon the Templar degrees. In fact, we consider them among the best and most inspiring of the American system. However, we believe they should have remained separated from a non-sectarian body. It is a mistake, to again quote Mr. Moore, to connect Templarism with Freemasonry. Frederick Speed, 33rd degree past R.E. Grand Commander Miss, is of the same opinion. He says, "If then anywhere the door of any degree is closed against him who believes in one God and the soul's immortality on account of other tenets of his faith, that degree is not Freemasonry. That the Templar degrees properly form no part of Masonry, we have the declaration of the reputed author of the American Rituals, Thomas Smith Webb, who in 1812 and several subsequent editions of his Freemasons Monitor says, although the several orders of knighthood are conferred both in Europe and America, reputedly under the sanction of Masonic assemblies, they compose no part of the system of Freemasonry. He tells us that in America they are conferred as honorary degrees. Mr. Speed continues, it is time for intelligent Masons to divest themselves of the superlatively ridiculous and often exploded idea that there is any connection between what we now know as Templarism and the fraternity of free and accepted Masons, except that which is found in the restriction of its membership to those who have first received the several degrees of Masonry. It is entirely compatible with all the obligations of Masonry that a Mason should be a Templar, and we do not derogate from our standing as Masons when we take upon ourselves the additional vows of the Knights Templars. But this does not make Templarism Masonry, nor do we add anything to the dignity and high character of the order by making the assertion that it is. Page 735. Ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. The ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, or Scottish Masonry, did not originate in Scotland, as its name might lead one to suppose. It was derived from a body in France, formerly known as the Emperors of the East and West, who organized in 1758 in Paris a rite called the Rite of Perfection, consisting of 25 degrees to which 8 or more were subsequently added. The immediate source from which the French Masons derived these rites is unknown, but it is held by some that they are the lineal descendants of the ancient order of the Temple. Before the death of Grand Master Jacques de Molay, and while he was in prison awaiting execution, he instituted several metropolitan lodges, one of which was at Paris, and it was from this source that Scottish Masonry was derived. General Pike, the great authority on the Scottish Rite, accepts this view. The name itself is supposed to have come from a number of Scottish Masons who were in France at the time of the organization. A Grand Lodge was formed at Charleston, South Carolina in 1783, a Supreme Council, 33rd degree, in 1801, and the rite has been called by its present name Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite since that date. The rite is founded on the symbolic degrees and is conferred only on Master Masons. Its degrees begin with the 4th and extend to the 33rd. They are conferred in subordinate bodies as follows: the Lodge of Perfection, 4th to 14th inclusive, the Council of Princes of Jerusalem, 15th and 16th, the Chapter of Rose Croix, 17th and 18th, the Consistory of Sublime Princes of the Royal Secret, 19th to 32nd, except in the southern jurisdiction where the 19th to 30th. Degrees constitute a Council of Kadosh, and their consistory begins with the 31st. Degree and the Supreme Council, whose officers are active 33rd. Degree Masons, there is also an honorary 33rd degree conferred by the Supreme Council as a merit for distinguished service in the fraternity. The moral teaching of these degrees is exemplary, and the dramatic effect of the work is beyond comparison. We have neither time nor space to consider the system in detail, but there are certain teachings connected with some of the degrees to which your special attention is directed. We refer to those which by some are thought to be sectarian in character, and therefore opposed to the original plan of the Reconstructionists, to lay a broad foundation for the ceremonies which would admit men of all religions. It is to be regretted that such a cosmopolitan basis could not have been maintained. We need to remember, however, that Masonry is symbolic, and the legends, even of the so-called sectarian degrees, are symbols used to set forth an inner truth and are not in themselves necessarily sectarian, even when appropriated by a special religion, for they are essentially universal and belong to general religion. To illustrate more fully, Dr. Mackey, in speaking of the cryptic degrees, which are based upon the legend of the sacred vault, says, "To support this legend, there is no historic evidence and no authority except that of the Talmudic writers. It is clearly a mythical symbol, and as such we must accept it. Like every other myth and allegory of Masonry, the historical relation may be true or it may be false. It may be founded on fact or be the invention of imagination. The lesson is still there and the symbolism teaches it, exclusive of the history." Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, page 852. General Pike also emphasizes this principle. In speaking of the legend upon which the degree of the Royal Arch is based, he says, "It is of but little importance whether it is in any wise historical, for its value consists in the lessons which it inculcates and the duties which it prescribes to those who receive it. The parables and allegories of the Scriptures are not less valuable than history. Nay, they are more so, because ancient history is little instructive, and truths are concealed in and symbolized by the legend and the myth." Morals and Dogma, page 210. We should bear this fact in mind when we consider the degrees of the Scottish Rite, especially that of the Rose Croix. The legend upon which this degree is based is purely symbolical, and as such conveys a grand truth. Some, however, have thought that the doctrine of this degree excluded the non-Christian, which shows how the purpose of Masonry has been misunderstood. General Pike, in speaking of the degree, says, "No Mason has the right to interpret the symbols of this degree for another, or to refuse him its mysteries if he will not take them with the explanation and commentary superadded." Again, he says, "Each of us makes such applications to his own faith and creed of the symbols and ceremonies of this degree as seems to him proper." Morals and Dogma, chapter 28. This is well said. Every intelligent Mason should make a protest against the crude and antiquated explanations of the symbols given in this degree. The degree itself is not necessarily sectarian, but the explanations adopted in the work are not only sectarian and unmasonic, but they belong to a system of things which intelligent people are fast leaving behind. Let me briefly summarize the explanation given by the authority just quoted. The cross has been a sacred symbol from the earliest antiquity. It is found upon all the enduring monuments of the world, in Egypt, Assyria, India, Persia, Mexico, etc. Its peculiar meaning in this degree is that given to it by the ancient Egyptian Thoth, or Ptha, who is represented on the oldest monuments carrying in his hand the crux ansata, a Tau cross with a ring over it. This was the hieroglyph for life, and with a triangle prefixed meant life-giving. To us, therefore, it is the symbol of life. of that life that emanates from deity and of that eternal life for which we hope. The rose was anciently sacred to Aurora and the sun. It is a symbol of dawn, of the resurrection light and the renewal of life. The cross and rose together signify hieroglyphically the dawn of eternal life and the advent of a Saviour for which all nations hope. To the letters INRI, inscribed on the crux ansata, many meanings have been assigned. The Christian sees in them the initials of the inscription upon the cross of Christ, Iesu Nazaremus Rex Judiorum. The sages of antiquity connected it with one of the greatest secrets of nature, that of universal regeneration. They interpreted it thus: Igna natura renovatur integra. Nature is renovated by fire. The alchemists and Hermetic Masons framed for it this aphorism, Igna nitrum roris invenitur. The letters are initials of the Hebrew words that represent the four elements: Yamim, the sea or water; Nur, fire; Ruas, the air; Yibisha, the earth. Chapter 28. This degree symbolized the final triumph of truth over falsehood, of life over death, of good over evil. No one Mason has a right to measure for another within the walls of a Masonic temple the degree of veneration which he shall feel for any reformer or founder of any religion. We teach a belief in no particular creed as we teach unbelief in none, page 308. But we recognize in the founder of the Christian religion an initiate into the true mysteries, one who came to rebuild again the eternal verities, to utter again the divine wisdom to a needy world. The Knight of the Rose Croix will revere his memory and honor him as one of the true servants of the Most High. We recognize all initiates as brothers. We belong to no creed. We invite men of all religions to enlist under our banner and work to bring in a better day. Dr. Mackey says, if Masonry was simply a Christian institution, the Jew and the Muslim, the Brahmin and the Buddhist could not conscientiously partake of its illumination, but its universality is its boast. In its language, citizens of every nation may converse. At its altar, men of all religions may kneel. To its creed, disciples of every faith may subscribe. The Symbolism of Freemasonry, Mackey, page 237. We have dwelt upon this degree because of the principle involved. The legends upon which this degree is based, while drawn from the New Testament, are also to be found in many other world scriptures. For the symbolism of which the real meaning has been shown in earlier lectures is universal. The degree itself is really out of place in the Scottish Rite system. It should belong in the Templar system, if anywhere. To again quote General Pike, we teach the truth of none of the legends we recite. They are to us but parables and allegories involving and enveloping Masonic instruction, the vehicles of useful and interest information, everyone being at liberty to apply our symbols and emblems as he thinks most consistent with truth and reason and with his own faith. Morals and Dogma, page 329. Let every Scottish Rite Mason bear this fact in mind, and it would be well for the Knight Templar to remember this also, for there we have the same symbols and the same crude interpretation of them. These symbols, as we have seen, refer to realities in the divine life of Jesus, rather than to the incidents in his physical experiences. In the early days of the Scottish Rite, the system was full of grotesque and incongruous things, of contradictions and fantastic extravagances. The Supreme Council of the Southern Jurisdiction of the United States at length undertook the task of revising the work of the 30 degrees under its jurisdiction. But while this was done with considerable success, there are still anachronisms and contradictions which should be eliminated to make the system harmonious. The moral teaching of all the rites is excellent. One who lives up to the standard inculcated in the Scottish Rite degrees will fulfill every demand made by the strictest code of morality. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.